Thank you all for joining tonight for this month's lessons in Angular. We're going to hear tonight about what a Mono Repo is, and then also get to look at how to set one up and best practices for managing one. This event is being streamed over the web, so let's give a big shout out to all the people that are joining us virtually, as well as a big welcome to our awesome Rocky Mountain Angular attendees that made it down here tonight. We're here tonight at Briebug's corporate headquarters. My name is Jesse Sanders. I'm the CEO and founder, and I'll be your MC this evening. All right, so a little bit about Briebug here. We're here to help. We want to just take a moment to just share with you what this looks like. We're a team of software development experts who partner with engineering teams to guide them in best practices that simplify their development environment. When you engage with us, we go through a breezy process. So first we get to know your team, the current development environment and the code, kind of, getting a landscape. At this point, we step back and we share our view on the current development blockers, opportunities, and what are the risks based on what you're doing right now. We'll then provide an actionable plan of priorities about how you might go about fixing this. And then lastly, we get started working with you and creating rapid results for you and your team. Ultimately, the idea here is that teams get back to delivering robust digital solutions at the speed required, creating the security that everybody wants and needs, and the recognition that they deserve. With that, please welcome Jason Hodges.
Okay, so as Jesse said, my name is Jason Hodges, and I'm going to be going over Mono Repo with Angular Workspaces tonight. I am a principal application architect for Charter Communications. I oversee the architecture and code base for the web portal team for our mobile line of business. I've been with them for a little over a year and a half now, and developing in Angular since version 1. Husband and father to those two beautiful kids back there in the corner, lover of beer and being outdoors. So how many of you have worked with Mono Repos, know of Mono Repos, ran away from Mono Repos, any of the above? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, so at Charter Communications, our portal that I'm an architect on is one of several projects in a Mono Repo. We jumped into the Mono Repo, we as in the mobile team, probably about a year ago. And so I've seen the ups and downs and the ins and outs of it, all the way through the development side, through CI and completion. And so what exactly is a Mono Repo? A Mono Repo is a collaborative workspace where multiple projects can exist and live under one Git repository, one true line of source code. A lot of Mono Repos will do trunk-based development where master is the truth and single feature branching off of that. You basically are going to have one package.json file controlling the entire repo for all your projects. You can share libraries, services, just anything and everything that would be collaborative amongst many projects are going to exist within inside this one repository. So why the need for Mono Repos? The need kind of came out of the desire to have more streamlined development processes all the way from the development side through CI, CD, and the release processes. If you can picture the pain points, for example, for CI and CD DevOps teams on managing multiple configurations that are very similar in nature for multiple repositories, multiple release cycles, multiple containers on Docker, and Rancher utilization that has to be controlled and configured and synced across many different repositories that are pushing and committing and merging and releasing every day, all day. With inside of a Mono Repo, you can kind of alleviate a lot of that pain by grouping together those configurations and putting similar tasks together so that all of these projects that exist inside of a Mono Repo can share those similar configurations, and people all the way from your DevOps, your engineers, your developers, your architects can focus all of their time and energy in one central location as opposed to having to manage multiple repos. So with Angular CLI, you have the ability to create workspaces. And so what is a workspace? A workspace is a project that will allow you to have multiple applications and libraries within it that are all going to have their configurations inside of the angular.json file. You're going to have the single package.json file. And when working with the libraries, you're going to be able to import those directly from your built dist directory. So if you want to start testing your libraries right away while you're developing them, you don't have to worry about exporting out to NPM or Artifactory or whatever package manager you use at your company and then reinstalling and all that stuff. You can just simply build the library, import it in, and it's there, right? So as you can see, creating a workspace is just as simple as ng new, the name of your workspace. For this example, I just put create application false because I wanted to show you guys what you're going to get out of the box with that command. And so can you guys see this over here okay, the project tree? Jesse and I were discussing this a little bit earlier, and I couldn't find a good way in WebStorm to make the font any larger. But as you can see, you get a basic shell. Ignore the node modules in the dist. That's for later branches that I left in there. But you're going to get your very basic things. You're going to get your getignore, your angular.json file, your package.json file, your tsconfig. You know, just the very, very basic shell is your Angular workspace. And so if we look inside here, you can see new project root, projects, and currently we have no projects inside of this workspace. So let's look at adding an application or 2 or 3 or 7. So inside of your workspace, you can simply just do ng generate or ngg application and then the name of your application. And if any of you are wondering about the Indiana University, this project you can pull down from my repo. I actually kind of breezed through those first slides pretty fast, but I'll go back real quick and let you guys get those if you want right there, if you want to follow along. Yeah, there you go. So basically, since it is college football season and I have a younger brother that plays for Indiana University on the O-line, I thought it would be a great example to put together like a big Mono Repo that was like Big Ten based. So you have your East Division, your West Division, and so all the teams are going to pretty much have similar websites, right? They're going to display rosters, headers, those sorts of shared items, right, that you would commonly see collaborative inside of a Mono Repo. So what do you get after you create an application? All right, so you remember when we looked inside the angular.json file previously, and we had 0 projects, right? And the new project root was projects. Well, now you can see, let's see. You can see we have multiple applications in here that I've created under this branch, right? And each one of them are going to be your standard Angular application. It's going to have all your, your standard schematics, where the root is, the prefix for it. Then you're going to have all your standard, build, serve, test, lint, end-to-end testing configurations that you would normally see with an application, right? And all of those reside over here. And you'll notice, though, something different about this from a standard Angular application is you don't have a package.json file and you don't have an angular.json file and any of those shell files that we have in the workspace located under the application, because these applications are part of the workspace. All right, so next, let's see what it looks like to add a library. All right, so I'm just gonna build this library real quick just to make sure that everything is good. All right, so that's built. And if we go over here and we take a look in our dist directory, we have our lib header right there. So let's go ahead and take a look at our angular.json file again. And you'll now see we have lib header here, and the project type is a library. And you see it has a lot of the same standard stuff with the exception of what's under architect. We only have build, test, and lint. We don't have the full set of configs that an application would have because libraries are not applications and applications are not libraries. So let's go take a look at some of the things about the library. One thing you'll notice is that it does have its own package.json file, and it has this new file, this ng-package.json. That is so you can actually do a publish of the library. So if you did want to publish it, if you did have an internal package manager like Artifactory, you could publish it out so that it's available for other people within the company or within the Mono to bring in that way. Because as I said before, libraries are available to be imported in from the dist directory on build, and I'll show you what that looks like. So if we take a look at the main tsconfig for our Mono Repo workspace here, you can see it added these paths for us. So what do these do? These allow us to do the import into our projects without having to actually publish the library. So we can go up and we can take a look at Indiana University, and we can see that I have the header config and the header module, which are both exported out of the library. It's probably underlined because I probably need to rebuild. But while we're in this file, you can see too that I have created a config that I can pass down into the library's module via for root. And if we go and take a look at what's going on in the header, we can take a look at the module, and you'll see it has this static for root that accepts a config. Type this module with providers, and you'll see that it has this lib header service, and we're going to provide it a token, and we're going to use the value config. So what this is allowing us to do is each individual team site within this repo is going to be able to pass in their own config, and this header library only has to have its set development, and any one of those sites can just pass in a config and render the same headers all across the board for each individual site. You can see I have an interface for the config here that asks for the conference, the abbreviation, and the title. We're going to use that header service, and we're going to get the config, and we're going to get the team. The application is also going to pass in an environment file that's going to tell this library component's service how to call the HTTP client. So if you see right here, so if I'm deployed, if I'm on production, then it's going to use the endpoint. But if I'm running locally, then it's going to use my dev endpoint because I have set up a proxy for each application in the repo to use. So let's take a look at what that looks like. You can see we have the Indiana University website running here with its header. Switch over to Michigan State with its header, University of Michigan with its header, Ohio State, Penn State, which their colors on the API don't come back exactly right. And so let's see what happens if somebody goes in and decides to change the background to alt. Let me rebuild that header. And now you can see somebody's getting called to the principal's office. All right, so let me get out of this, and we'll jump over to one more library creation. And so this library component is for a player card. So it defines the grid and utilizes its own service, just like the header library component did, to call the API. It receives configs just the same way, passed in from each individual site under this workspace. And then it returns these player cards for the roster. So you can already start to see, I mean, this is a very basic rudimentary example, but you can see the benefit of coexisting inside of a large workspace like this, because you can have multiple projects. And each one of these teams, I mean, you might have the West Conference that decides they don't want to do this, right? Which I'll show just a little bit later on, that maybe they want to go a different way, right? So they don't want to be exactly the same way. So they utilize some of these things. They might use some of the interfaces, some of the services, whatever, but they don't go full in the same as everybody else. But making this modification across all these projects, if they were all separate repos, would be a nightmare. Or you'd have to deal with somebody over here working on the library components, publishing them out, notifying all these teams, hey, I just released a new update to that. They pull them in, this team says, oh, hey, that broke ours. Okay, well, let me go fix that. Blah, blah, blah. Notifying everybody again, hey, just released another fix for it. Update, those sorts of things. This, you can just do development and roll with it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sharing. All right, so coexisting in one of these workspaces or Mono Repo gives you the ability and the flexibility to share many things, such as images, models, styles. To me, styles is a huge one. I've always been a huge fan of SAS and just being able to do all the imports and the partials and all those sorts of things. And I love coming up with unique mix-ins and utility functions and helpers in SAS. And that's huge to be able to write those in one place and then have those shared out amongst multiple projects, all inside the same repo. This one's also a big one too, prettier, right? You can have one prettier RC file sit at the root of your repo, and all your projects are now following that format. Scripts, any type of scripts that you write, whether it's for your front-end devs or once you get into CI/CD, they can be written once, stored once, and shared amongst all the projects. And then various tools. One of the things that WebStorm has is the ability to test REST calls to backend APIs. So you'll notice under this tools directory that I have an API directory, and I have these .http files. These are something specific to WebStorm, but I can go in here and I can convert curl request, or I can write in the WebStorm HTTP format, get request, post request, what have you, so that I can test these right inside WebStorm, right? So if I just run one of these, boom, right there inside my IDE, I can test these out. So that's nice, because when you have, you have Figaro and you have different back-end test tools, but having those scripted out right there inside your IDE that can be committed with your repo, that don't have to be compiled at build time, that can be shared amongst all the teams in one location, I feel is a huge benefit. It's a huge win. Okay, so let's revisit what goes into having a well-functioning Mono. Simplified package management. A single package JSON file that is the source of truth for all the projects that are running inside of your Mono Repo. A single node modules directory. So, when somebody decides they want to delete your yarn lock file and blow away the node modules and do a reinstall, you know who to go to, who broke all your projects. It should be configured in a way that only projects affected by a PR or changes are rebuilt and tested. This is huge. I can speak from real world experience that when we got into the Mono Repo and a lot of things were still being worked out and configured and understood about the entire extent of the process, we had pipelines that would run forever. It was like, okay, I just pushed up a build, I'll come back after lunch and see if it's done. Because it would kick off every single job, every single test, every single build, every single deploy, and it was a nightmare. All right, so that's one of the things that should be addressed right up front if you decide to go into a Mono, is how are we going to address the rebuilding and the testing specifically to code that was affected, not all of the code. And last, ability to share tooling. Proxy config, as I showed you guys, the one proxy file that I had in there that each one of the projects could use, each one of the libraries could use. Local server, like if you wanted to set up something like Express or what is the one with NX Nest, you can set those up one time, configure it to use your proxy, whatever, and any of your projects inside there can use it. So what I discovered too with workspaces and Angular CLI is that there was a lot you could do with it and a certain distance you could go, but what you needed was some power-ups. So the guys at Norwal have created the NX extensions, and I'm going to show you guys a little bit about what that will add on top of your Angular workspace. All right, so let's start with the package.json file. I've added in a bunch of these affected scripts. These were just what I was talking about, and the NX guys or the Norwal guys have figured it out with NX. You can check for your affected apps. You can check for your affected libraries, your build, run the ET on only the affected pieces inside of your Mono Repo. You can print out a dependency graph to show what applications depend on what. For this branch, I introduced another project, the only one out of the teams that I put in here that is actually in the West Conference of the Big Ten, Illinois. And so if we run this dependency graph, we're going to see right now that we have all of the applications And then we have these libraries that have been added with NX. And the University of Illinois project is the only one that has dependencies on these that are graphed. And this is basing this branch off of master. And so I'll show you guys in a second what it looks like when you make a modification off of the branch. But let's point out a few more things that you get with NX. So I actually added NX on this branch, which, as you see, I already had multiple projects in it. It will throw error, and it will tell you that it errored out because you have more than one project in this workspace. So a lot of the stuff I added in manually, which I'll tell you was not hard to do. It was fairly simple. I had another NX project out on the side, so I was kind of referencing, what all it needed. There's a nx.json file that will list out all of your projects. And this will allow you, as you saw earlier, I believe it was Nikita showed this, you can put tags in here, and you can kind of do, you can kind of put boundaries around what applications can depend on what, so that if you have a library, let's use the Big Ten model, if you have something that was developed just for the West Conference, and one of the teams over in the East Conference, their developer tried to bring in that package, and it was boundary specified in here, scoped to that West Conference, it would throw error in your IDE and say, this is not allowed. It's not, it's not allowed in this project. So that's really nice, because especially when you start getting tons of projects in your Mono and you go look at that dependency graph, you can start to have more control over that, where a package can go and where it can't go. All right, so the schematics for the angular.json file, you can see here I brought in some of the Norwal application, and the Angular library. And for our CLI, we've changed the default collection to Norwal Angular. And you'll see I've added a couple of libraries here under the workspace now. And these were actually added with the command for Norwal, as opposed to the standard like ng generate or ng add. And you can see like data, for example, right? It now puts it under libs instead of projects like our standard Angular CLI workspace did. It's going to still say that it was a library. And then you're going to get lint and test. You can see UI. Now UI is an interesting one because it's a library, but then under there, you can specify Angular components and you can scope it to the project UI. I see we're running over a little bit of time. I'll wrap it up. So you can see that I have an API under here as well. And we can go up and take a look at these. You can see that I've built out an endpoint service here now that can be shared. And if we take a look under data, I can just put my interfaces under data and export those out as a library. And you can see if we go and we look at like where this has been used, you can see, right? So I've set my observable to a type of player array, and let's go take a look at that, right? Right there. And so any updates that I make, like the way that the NX tools sets itself apart from what I showed you with the standard Angular CLI library is that you don't have to rebuild or watch these, right? They're built application specific. So if it detects that an application is using that, it will just go ahead and do all the compiling and everything that it needs to do with the application that's running. So you don't have to worry about running your library and your application side by side or doing the builds of both. All right, so with these running, we can take a look at this now, and this is what I was talking about. So what I have here is the University of Illinois that is actually using the configurations that I put in place post NX install, right? And we're building out its own grid and doing everything that exists still in the Mono Repo, but they decided to go a different route. Yet some of the things are still the same and used and shared, but not everything, right? And so let's take one more last look at that affected diagram, right? So this is my last branch, and I have a single commit on here that has not been merged into master. And what I did is I took this roster variable and the constructor, and I have added it on the Indiana University component. And let's run the affected dependency graph again and see what it gives us. Okay, so now you see that we have a very similar dependency graph that we did earlier when none of the apps had been affected because it was a clean branch that had already been merged into master. Well, Indiana University project decided, hey, I want to use that API and that data interface that you have as well. And you can see it outlined in red because it hasn't yet been merged into master. And just to show, if we take the same stuff, and everything always goes from the West Coast to the East Coast, right? So we'll go from Illinois over to Indiana, and then we'll take it to Ohio State. And then, hey, now we're out to Pennsylvania. They said they want it too. So now let's run that dependency graph one more time. And so what does that mean? That means that when you push up to your CI now, you don't have to run every single test. You don't have to run every single build. You can run that command that says affected:test, affected:build. Bam, I'm ready for my PR to be merged, right? You're not sitting out on lunch waiting for your pipeline to finish. So that's all I have. The benefits of a Mono Repo, I think I've shared plenty of those. You got shared resources, components, services, utilities, shared CI, similar configurations, resources such as AWS, Rancher, shared assets. The downsides to a Mono Repo, version dependency. Some people might not like being all stuck on the same version. Build and test bloat, like I talked about, make sure that that's one of the first things that you address if you're going to go into a mono, is because if it's not configured correctly, you're going to face all kinds of nightmares. Hopefully something like NX will be able to help you out with that. Larger code base could be overwhelming at first. And last but not least, a single code base. If it's broke, everyone's down. And we've experienced that before. So my name's Jason Hodges. You can find me on GitHub at Jason Hodges or on Twitter _Jason Hodges. I thank you guys for listening. Any questions?
Shared services, can that also include authentication or payment systems?
Yes, it can. I have seen it done before to where you can configure authentication services, login services, authorization services to be shared. Absolutely.
Thanks.
So when you went to Mono Repo, did you go from scratch or did you migrate from multiple repositories? If you came over from multiple repositories, what was that experience like? What did you have to go through?
Okay, so the Mono Repo had already been created and established, and there was already multiple projects that were in there, and we brought our project over into it. It wasn't too difficult. It was just some of the standardization of the Docker, the GitLab CI, those sorts of things that I had to reconfigure in order to mesh into the way that their pipelines and build cycles and all that stuff were running. And a funny story on that too. Our very last commit before we like cut it off and we're in the mono, our P2 architect at the time, him and I were joking because I was like, OSH. And he was like, and that emoji. And we were like, okay. And so forever and ever, my name and commit message is going to be on that repo as poop emoji. And emojis, I found out like a year later, can mess up stuff when it comes to being in a commit message.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jason. Everyone give Jason Hodges a big applause here.